Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning, depending on where you are coming from. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Not sure where you are in the country, but it's sunny here, which is always lovely. We'll just wait another few minutes here as we see the participants trickle in. Well, I think we'll get things started. We pride ourselves on being punctual. So at the spirit of that, hello and welcome to Startup Canada's webinar entitled Privacy in Your Business, benefit from OPC's business advisory services for personal information protection and Electronic Documents Act compliance. You know, today in this digital era, safeguarding personal information is not just good practice, but quite frankly, it's essential for business growth and success. And that's why today's session is so important, especially for small business owners and founders as you grow and scale your businesses. My name is Natasha Morano, and I am the Director of Corporate and Government Affairs at Startup Canada, and I will be your host for today. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I am located on is on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples. And I encourage all of you to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are residing on today. We welcome you to connect with each other in the chat. And for those of you that are perhaps unfamiliar, it's just on the bottom of your screen and you can see chat. So please open that up and we will be doing our absolute best to monitor the chat function and just make sure that in your messages it's to everyone so we can all see your comments. Zoom defaults to messages to only send to the hosted panelists, so you'll just need to adjust that to everybody. And today's session is being recorded and will be added to our YouTube channel afterwards as a living resource. So if you are making notes today and you missed something, not to worry, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in the coming days. Now, for those of you who are perhaps not overly familiar, Startup Canada is a national nonprofit organization that really is the gateway to Canada's entrepreneurial ecosystem. We're here to connect entrepreneurs with the support, community, and the tools that you need to build a successful business in Canada. And since launching in 2012, Startup Canada has grown to support more than 130 entrepreneurs annually through our ever-growing community of ecosystem partners from coast to coast to coast. Now, this webinar is part of our Startup Gov programming, which really prides itself on connecting the perspectives of entrepreneurs, innovators, industry executives, and government representatives to raise the bar for Canada as a globally competitive and innovation nation. And the program showcases programming that is provided at various levels of government to help streamline access to service for early stage founders. So with that said, I would like to thank our partners who really see the value in exercises like this and support our Startup Gov program. First, a big thank you to our presenting partner, Amazon, as well as our program partner, Export Development Canada, our ecosystem partner, MasterCard, and our community partners, including Kane, Maine, CGLCC, and Boundless Accelerator. I would also like to thank our dear friends at the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada for taking time to join us today. Now, in terms of format, we will begin with a presentation from our speakers, followed by an interactive Q&A. So again, please use the chat function to pose your questions, and we'll do our absolute best to monitor those. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our speakers for today. Karen Sanghera, Senior Advisor, Business Advisory Directorate of the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and Monica Kopp, Senior Advisor, Business Advisory Director at the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. Over to both of you, ladies.
Thanks, Natasha. We appreciate all of you taking the time today to learn more about privacy. And, you know, maybe I'm biased, but Natasha, I think you're right. Safeguarding personal information is really essential and should be a really important part of everyone's business growth and their success. So today I will give a little brief, agenda of what we're going to talk about. Essentially, we're going to go into a bit of introduction to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, or the OPC as we'll call it, and also a brief overview of the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, thankfully shortened down to PIPEDA or PIPEDA, however you want to call it, an overview of the OPC's resources for businesses, and of course, our business advisory services and how they may be able to help you. And then we'll welcome some questions, and hopefully we can give you guys some, quick answers that will help you out. As you can see here, we have a cute little comic, and we'll have some more of these to bring some of the privacy issues to light in a more entertaining way. And we'd like to believe that Canadians really do think of privacy as important. So I guess for the OPC, let's start with the OPC, where we work. Quite simply, OPC's mandate is to protect and promote the privacy rights of Canadians. So the current Privacy Commissioner of Canada is Philippe Dufresne, pictured here. The Commissioner is appointed by Parliament of Canada for a 7-year term. The Privacy Commissioner is an agent of Canada's Parliament. This means that OPC is independent of government and reports directly to the Parliament. The Commissioner regularly appears before parliamentary committees to provide advice and bring attention to privacy issues that may be occurring. The Commissioner also tables an annual report to Parliament that talks about the OPC's work, which includes like our promotion activities and any investigations. The OPC oversees compliance with 2 privacy laws: the Privacy Act, which is the federal public sector law that covers the personal information handling practices of federal government departments and agencies. And then OPC also oversees compliance with PIPEDA, which is Canada's federal private sector privacy law. So Monica and I both work at the Business Advisory Directorate, and our role is to promote compliance with PIPEDA. So our focus today is going to be PIPEDA. And if you're a business owner or you're working with commercial activity, this is the one that is generally applicable to you. Before, I guess, diving into PIPEDA, we want to highlight that under Canada's Constitution, privacy in the commercial context can be regulated both federally and provincially. So in some provinces, they've enacted laws that are substantially similar to PIPEDA. So in these provinces, organizations are generally exempt from PIPEDA with respect to the collection, use, or disclosure of personal information if the activity is occurring within that province. So as soon as the personal information crosses a border, whether provincial or international, PIPEDA comes into play. The province, which kind of, just to summarize that, I guess, like if you're a business in Alberta, but you're doing work with customers in Ontario and you're collecting their PI, then that personal information is coming from Ontario to Alberta, so PIPEDA would apply. The provinces that have substantially similar private sector privacy laws are BC, Alberta, and Quebec, depicted by the dark blue. Substantially similar health privacy laws are found in Ontario, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador, depicted by the red icon on the map. So that just gives you kind of an idea, a little bit of jurisdiction. I'm going to pass it now to Monica, who's going to talk to us about PIPEDA.
Thanks, Karen. Okay. So let's begin by talking about the definition of personal information under PIPEDA. So personal information is any factual or subjective information, recorded or not, about an identifiable individual. Information is considered to be about an individual where that information alone or in combination with other information could lead to the identification of an individual. So, for example, a person's age on its own is not identifiable. However, if you combine that piece of information with another piece of information like an address, then that can become identifiable. So let's look at a few examples of personal information here on the slide. So we've got name and email address. I think that's pretty intuitive. But then there are also some other types of personal information that under PIPEDA are generally considered sensitive. So examples of sensitive personal information include financial and health information, also biometrics, sexual orientation, ethnicity, political opinion, and religious or philosophical beliefs. The thing is, even non-sensitive information can become sensitive depending on the context. So, for example, a subscription to a magazine on its own might not be sensitive information, but it may become sensitive if it's a subscription to a magazine on a particular subject. Also, the more personal information you collect, the more likely it's going to be considered sensitive because of all the information as a whole that you're collecting. Sensitive information also requires a higher level of safeguarding, which I'll talk about a little later on. And also, if you're collecting sensitive information, you need to obtain it with express consent from your customer. So, for examples of financial information that would be sensitive, we've got, credit card number, purchase history, credit score, health information, a medical diagnosis, and of course, as I mentioned, biometric information. So let's talk about the application of PIPEDA. So PIPEDA will apply to your startup if it collects, uses, and discloses personal information in the course of a commercial activity, or if it's a federally regulated business. And for federally regulated businesses, PIPEDA will also apply to the personal employee information that those businesses collect from their employees. And just to note, all businesses in Canada's territories are regulated federally, so PIPEDA always applies to them. We also want to highlight that PIPEDA is technology neutral, so it doesn't single out any one technology. So whether you're brick and mortar or if you're online, PIPEDA applies. So PIPEDA has an overarching requirement found in subsection 5.3, and it addresses appropriate purposes. So as you can see, it says, an organization may collect, use, or disclose personal information only for purposes that a reasonable person would consider are appropriate in the circumstances. So this means that even if you have consent from your customer, you can't collect personal information for any purpose. Over time, the OPC has identified inappropriate purposes, or what the OPC calls no-go zones. And so just to give you an example of one of those no-go zones, an organization cannot surveil an individual through audio or visual functionality of the individual's own device. And so the OPC has guidance on the OPC website on this particular topic, which is linked on this slide, if you want to explore that further. PIPEDA is principles-based, and there are 10 fair information principles found in Schedule 1 to PIPEDA that businesses must comply with. And so I'm going to briefly go through each one of them because they really are the heart of PIPEDA, and it's really important for you as a business owner to be aware of all of the principles. So the principle we're starting with is identifying purposes. So the heart of this is, why are you collecting in the first place? So this principle requires organizations to identify and document the purposes for collection. So when you know the purposes for why you want to collect personal information, then this will help you to determine what personal information to collect to fulfill those purposes. Essentially, you can't start collecting personal information without first knowing the purpose for why you are collecting that personal information. And so this is a key thing you want to think about in your startup journey. The earlier, the better. And so purposes should be as clear and narrow as possible. So the next principle here, consent. This is the cornerstone of PIPEDA. Organizations are generally required to obtain meaningful consent from their customers. This means that individuals, so your customers, they have to know the nature, purpose, and consequences of the personal information of the collection, use, and disclosure of their personal information. And they need to know if that personal information is going to be stored outside of Canada. Consent can be withdrawn at any time, and this is subject to legal or contractual restrictions and reasonable notice. So the principle of limiting collection requires you to collect only information that is necessary to fulfill an identified purpose. This next principle is related to the previous one, and it is limiting use, disclosure, and retention. Again, you want to think about what is necessary. So personal information should only be used or disclosed for purposes it was collected, and it should be retained only as long as necessary. So now we've got accuracy. So under this principle, you must ensure that personal information is sufficiently accurate, complete, and up to date. So you have to have procedures in place to verify the accuracy. So safeguards. Under PIPEDA, organizations must protect personal information against loss, theft, or any unauthorized access, disclosure, copying, use, or modification. And personal information has to be protected in a way that is appropriate to the sensitivity of that information. So the more sensitive the information, the higher the safeguards that have to be in place to protect that sensitive information. PIPEDA doesn't specify the exact types of safeguards that you must use. However, what you need to do is you have to continually ensure that you're adequately protecting the personal information in your care as technologies evolve and as new risks emerge. You need to know the latest safeguarding standards for your industry. Now, there are 3 types of safeguards. So we've got physical safeguards, such as, locking cabinets, or here, in this cartoon, a guard dog, for example. Organizational measures as well. So things like limiting who in your organization can access personal information that's been collected. And technological, such as passwords and encryption. So next is openness. So this means that your information management policies and practices should be readily available, easy to understand, and clear. And so, like depicted here, we don't want legalese and long convoluted sentences that people can't, figure out. It's got to be clear. And so the main way that organizations fulfill this principle is by having a privacy policy published on their website. Next, we've got individual access. So you as an organization, you have to respond to access requests that you receive from individuals, from your customers, because they have the right to access the personal information that you hold about them. And they have the right to challenge the accuracy and completeness of that information and to have that information amended as appropriate. And so you, in turn, as an organization, should respond to access requests within 30 days and provide access at minimal or no cost. Here we've got challenging compliance. So you as an organization, you've got to implement complaint handling and investigation procedures and address all complaints that you receive. And you need to improve any policies and practices as lessons learned from those complaints that have been received. And you need to inform individuals of any avenues of recourse if you cannot resolve a complaint. So avenues of recourse could be forwarding that complaint to an industry association, a professional body, or to the OPC. Okay, so this is our last principle. Technically, it's listed first, but we wanted to save this one for last because it sort of incorporates all of the other principles, because, you know, accountability essentially is being responsible for complying with PIPEDA and all of the 10 principles. And first, you do this by appointing someone in your business who is going to be responsible. And, you know, if it's a small startup, you're just starting out, it might be you, the founder. And for this, you need to create a privacy management program. And that's, you know, just a fancy way of saying all of these policies and procedures, you know, in one place as a whole. And so a few things here listed that you need to include in your privacy management program is first, a personal information inventory. And this is related to that, to the principle of identifying purposes, right? So you want to think about what personal information you want to collect, or what personal information you've already collected. And this way you have a sense of, you know, what you're dealing with, and you have, you know, all your ducks in a row. Of course, this also includes developing and documenting internal policies and processes. And so, for example, you know, how are you obtaining consent? What is your retention policy? It cannot be indefinite. And, you know, your safeguarding policy and cybersecurity policy. So you want to work on all of those. And of course, there are others as well. And then you need to manage your contracts with third-party service providers. So if you are going to be transferring personal information to a third-party service provider for processing, you have to ensure that that third party is going to protect that personal information. And so the way you do that is through contractual means. So you have to ensure that the contractual terms will require that third party to provide a comparable level of protection of that personal information. So that was the last principle. So I'm passing it back to Karen.
Thanks, Monica. Do you think we overwhelmed everyone with like all of this information in such a short amount of time today?
That was a lot of information, and I hope we still have everyone with us.
Well, I mean, the good part is we're not going to leave you guys high and dry. We're going to give you, we come with prepared with some resources. So everyone's going to get a copy of this deck. So don't worry about writing down, you know, the names and titles. But we have some key resources that we thought would be really useful for everyone. One of them is the OPC resource for businesses. This goes into more detail about the principles Monica talked about. It tells you, kind of summarizes them, but also gives you some practical, tangible ways to comply with them. We have the PIPEDA self-assessment tool. This way you can see where you are on your privacy journey, if there's any major gaps, or if you're doing everything good. And then we have getting accountability right. So this goes into more about the accountability principle, but as Monica said, it encompasses all 9 other ones, and it'll give you some good tips and guidance as well. We also have provided some examples of issue-specific guidance. Things like consent can be really challenging, and what to include in your consent notice. You know, we have a lot of business startups doing e-marketing, you know, where you're emailing or using text messages. So this guidance here will show you how to do that properly. And then maybe some of you have startups that are collecting from kids. So the consent there and some of the other requirements are a little bit nuanced and different. So you want to make sure that, especially with the youth, your privacy requirements are properly done, especially consent. So hopefully, if some of these might be relevant to you, we hope they will be useful. And then, of course, we offer our business advisory services. So you just to start off, like, all our services are free, they're voluntary, and they're non-binding, which means if you do sign up for, you know, privacy clinic or an advisory consultation, we don't come back to you, you know, 6 months from now and say, did you do what you said you were going to do, or what happened? It's really up to you. So we offer quite a couple of things like presentation and whatnot, but these are the 3 that we felt were going to be relevant to you. We have privacy clinics, and which we mostly do a lot with startup hubs, actually, where businesses can book appointments with their advisors for, say, 30 minutes to an hour to discuss really specific privacy matters relating to their business. we hope that we can kind of resolve the issue within that meeting and leave you with some general guidance that will help you overcome the obstacle for that issue. And then we have advisory consultations. So these are more in-depth and require a little bit more time commitment, but essentially you are getting a full review of your privacy program or pieces of it that you perhaps may be a little uncertain about. And at the end of the consultation, you would get a letter of recommendation from us and the recommendations are all tailored to your organization. And then you take that away and decide when and how to implement those recommendations, like as appropriate to your business or where you are at it. We also have proactive engagements. These are very similar to advisory consultations, but this is where OPC would approach you. So maybe we see you in the news or in social media, and we think that your activities or initiatives have a high impact on the privacy of Canadians, or you're doing something really cool that maybe we feel that we could support you with. We might reach out to you. So that's another thing that we do. So I guess the question is, since we offer all these, you might be thinking, how do I know if I'm suitable for an advisory consultation? So we have a really small team, so we do try to filter out, and we try to focus on these types of organizations that are processing at a high level. So you have a big volume of personal information, and perhaps a lot of that personal information is highly sensitive. Perhaps you're collecting from across Canada, and what you're doing has significant privacy impacts for Canadians. And also if you're using, a novel approach or some new technology, and using AI or facial recognition, those types of things, perhaps the advisory consultation would be a great fit. And of course, if you're unsure, then you just ask and we will let you know. I feel like we are almost towards the end now. So we've left you guys our contact information here as well. We have an information center that operates during business hours, 9 to 4 Eastern. So they can answer your questions and also direct you in whatever is appropriate. So maybe they'll put you in contact with us, or perhaps they will direct you to our website for some of the guidance that we have. Our website can be a little clunky, so it's nice when you can just get to the link you want. I guess from now we can open up for questions if we have any right now. If not, Monica and I do have a few questions that a lot of businesses do ask us. So we're happy to kind of start off with that and see if we get everybody warmed up, or just maybe process your thoughts.
Also, I have a few questions that were DM'd to me that I can pose if you like, or if maybe Karen and Monica, if you wanted to kick off with 1 or 2 questions, I can weave. I have about 3 questions here, so I can weave those in. So let me know. I can kick it off with posing a question, or if you wanted to launch with one, whatever works best for you.
Sure. Well, I mean, Monica, if you're okay, why don't we go with the questions from the audience so we can.
Sounds good.
Sure. Okay. So one of the questions that came through on the business advisory service piece, and the question is around how far in advance do you suggest booking an appointment? Do these get booked up quite quickly? What's the sweet spot in terms of booking something, especially for those that are joining today? They'd like to know how soon they should potentially book an appointment.
I guess there's no real time. It really is dependent on, what is the issue. Because if it's a privacy clinic, or it's just like a half an hour meeting, you can do that at any time by calling that or contact information there to see if perhaps we can help you that way. We really just take, I guess, consultations as they come. But I would say this, for an advisory consultation or even a privacy clinic, it is really the maturity of your business. So if you're still at kind of thinking processes, then perhaps, contacting us might be a good idea. We can direct you to the general guidance that would help you start building up your documentation. But if you have a lot of the documentation completed and you're at a little bit more mature phase where you're ready for maybe a review, then perhaps the advisory consultation might be better. Monica, any thoughts?
Yeah, and the advisory consultation, the first meeting can kind of resemble a privacy clinic in the sense that we may, address certain guidance documents from our website. We may share those with the organization just so that they have a general sense of, what they need to comply with, but then, we identify the scope of the consultation, what exactly are we going to look at? And then we move forward with the consultation. There's also a terms of engagement that organizations have to sign. So it's kind of like a contract, but it basically sets out the terms, and Karen touched on several of those when she talked about consultations. So, it's free, it's voluntary. There's no obligation for you to, follow the recommendations. However, there is an understanding that we're both coming to this consultation in good faith. So you are going to, share the relevant documents that we need to look at in order to provide you with the recommendations. And it's confidential as well. And then we would, proceed with the consultation.
That's great. One question that I'm getting a DM from, if you could switch the slide back to that phone number in the
Yes.
contact slide. So again, to reiterate, our participants today are kind enough to share this presentation. So we will do that for all of you that have registered. But backed by popular demand, here is the contact slide. And we'll just leave that up for a few moments as we go through some additional questions. Thanks, Monica and Karen. I love the full wraparound support here. And I think this is something that's crucial, especially for early stage founders. It's really important for them to know about all of the tools in their toolkit, and becoming compliant and understanding the nuances of privacy from an early stage, and make sure you're teed up and set up for success. So I think this is really, really valuable information, and I learned a lot too as a small business owner. Another question, if you don't mind, I'll pose that came through is around the privacy management program. And the question is, if I'm starting up my business, how important is this information and sort of getting this in order within the first year of operation?
Monica, you want to take that one?
Sure. I would say that, the earlier you start working on your privacy management program, the better. It helps when you're developing your program. You're going through all, the thought processes of, organizing your business. You're thinking, what am I collecting? You're doing the personal information inventory. You're thinking, okay, how am I going to obtain consent? You're thinking it's helping you to organize yourself, I think. So the sooner, the better. And there's something called what we call privacy by design. So when you're designing your business and incorporating privacy from the beginning, that's really important. You can also avoid the costs of re-engineering things down the road. So building it from the beginning is really important. And I think it's a useful exercise for you as a startup founder.
Absolutely. Karen, did you want to add anything to that, or do you want me to pose another question that has come through?
I would just add that the sooner you do it, the better. You're building trust with your customer right from the get-go. And if you're organized with that, it's going to help your reputation and brand value.
Absolutely. I think that could be a bumper sticker slogan. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's absolutely correct. And just a reminder for those of you that are joining us, I'm still seeing some messages coming through in the chat. Please continue to use that, either post the question to everybody or continue to DM me, and I'm happy to pose these questions to our fantastic participants. One other question, and that is around the accountability principles. And that is, how often do these change or get updated? And how much attention should a small business owner spend on the accountability principles?
So the principles, the 10 principles that I went through, those are part of the law. And so that law was enacted in the year 2000, and though they have not changed since then. So they're pretty fundamental. And they're principles. So they're meant to, to be sort of evergreen, right? So so you basically, they can apply to any business at any time, and they're there to sort of ensure privacy compliance. So they don't change.
Okay. I hope that that addressed that question. It certainly seems that there was much clarity around that. They're the guiding principles almost, right?
Exactly.
The structural pieces. Okay, that's great. Those are all the questions that I received directly, but we still have some time left. So again, just a friendly reminder, if you have any questions, now is the time to put those forward in the chat, either to me directly or in the everyone section within the chat. But Karen and Monica, I know you do a lot of these and you probably get such wonderful, rich questions from participants. And so maybe there's a question that you can pose to one another that comes up quite often that hasn't come up today that may be informative to our audience.
Yeah, how about what about the principle of consent? Karen, maybe you can talk about some creative ways of fulfilling that principle.
Sure. I guess, I mean, a common way of obtaining consent that we have noticed, and maybe you have as well, is that business direct their customer to a quite lengthy privacy policy that the customer is expected to read and click on a box to agree, all happening in a very short period. So we really try to encourage businesses to use more innovative methods and, you know, such things as a just-in-time notification where a customer is provided the critical information before or at the time of collection, maybe with a link that they can click on to go into more details, or if they want other information, but it's a layering process. That way, you know, you're not sending your customer on font 10 pages and they're trying to look for what's actually critical, you know? So critical things are obviously, what are you collecting? Who is this information be shared with? Is it staying in Canada? Like those pieces need to be clearly made to the customer in order for that consent to be meaningful. So we really encourage businesses to kind of try layering or just-in-time notifications.
That's a great point.
Oh, I think, did we have another question? I see something in the chat, but.
Yeah, there's a question that came through. I'll read it. Thank you for the session. To what extent can a business respond to access requests if the customer is perhaps upset and maybe demanding phone call records or email records, etc., if it's becoming overly strenuous? So I'm thinking that maybe to paraphrase, if you have a request that's maybe urgent in the mind of that individual posing that question, and you're unsure sort of what your rights are and what to do in that situation, what would be the best course of action for an individual that's faced with this particular scenario?
Monica, do you mind if I answer this one?
Sure.
I think I have actually dealt with businesses that have this issue. And what we always say is that if you have a policy that outlines how you're handling access requests, you can always refer back to your policy. And if it is within the law, like the 30 days, you're okay. It's just really important when you don't have a process in place, then your customer is going to not know where to go, and that maybe they think you're a little bit disorganized or you're not understanding them. So again, not to be repeating about the, you know, having a clear policy and following the principles, but if you're organized internally, then that's going to show with your customer. You know, you can't help a customer being upset. This is going to happen at times, but what you can do at least is not feel rushed or by, you know, trying to get something done because you're going to refer back to your policy, which is legal and clear, and you can kind of calm your customer down that way. I don't know if that helps, but I really do think that it's a way sometimes to just say, look, we're doing the best we can. This is our policy. We'll get back to you, you know, how we can.
And again, that links back to just the importance of having good policies and a process in place from the get-go, right?
Exactly.
I hope that addressed your question to the individual that posed that. Again, feel free to use the chat function if you have any additional questions stemming from that particular piece. I am seeing some individuals raising their hand. If you could just refer back to using the chat function, that is the preferred method. And we're doing our absolute best to monitor that. Monica and Karen, any other common questions or themes or topics or even tips or tricks for our audience today as they absorb this information? And again, we will be sharing the presentation so you can go through and click the links and, you know, better understand how OPC is there to help you. And I think that's a really key takeaway, and why I thought this webinar was so important is that you do so much for small business owners, and knowledge and information is key. So tips or tricks, anything else that you would like to share with the audience before we look to wrapping up for today?
Well, sometimes we get asked if we help with the drafting of policies,
Oh,
and
interesting.
we don't. Yeah, that's the quick answer to that. We also don't offer any templates, but we do have a guidance document on tips for writing a privacy policy.
And
yeah, so that's one thing on privacy policies. And what else? What else can we talk about?
Monica, where would be the best way for a viewer to get that information that you just mentioned? Would it be directly going to this website, or would it be in one of the other helpful links on one of the other slides?
So we don't have a link to that on any of the slides, but we can provide that link to you, and maybe you can forward that when we
Absolutely.
provide the deck.
Okay, and one last question. That's Karen. You probably
Oh,
saw
no.
this question.
Let's go with the question.
Okay, so this will be our last question for today, and this is for a startup business, what policies should they apply first when they're short of funds and really just starting out? Like, what would be, I guess, the top recommendations that you would have as it refers to the policies when you're starting?
Good question.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, that is a great question.
I guess it also maybe depends on the context, like what kind of business, how much personal information you're collecting. So I think, the answer may be, it depends. But you want to think about what personal information are you going to be collecting, I would say. What do you think, Karen?
Yeah, I think we say it depends a lot because it really depends on the type of business. I mean, if you're not collecting a lot of personal information, then, but actually, you know what? I think the most important thing is your consent, like, because that's the cornerstone. So then when you start building your consent language on how you're obtaining personal information, you're going to have to look at a few other things, right? Like, what are our purposes? What are the risks? So that's always like your consent language I feel like would be a really important thing to start with. I mean, you're gonna ask Monica and I, we're gonna be like, everything's important, but it is all very dependent. And like if you reach out and we do a bit of a quick meeting in privacy clinic, we'd probably get some information and guide you in the right direction.
And again, I think that's just a great reiteration of there's additional resources available for the individual that posed the question. So you can go to the website, you can call that number, and somebody is there to help you kind of walk through this process, because doesn't sound like it's a one-size-fits-all approach. I think those are overarching principles, but then it's really specific to the type of business, right, that you're operating or thinking about opening.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we are almost at time. Monica and Karen, maybe I'll give the final words to you if there's any additional information that you wanted to share to the audience. And then once you share that, I'll just do a quick wrap up, and we will be back in touch with those that have joined us today with the presentation, with additional links. And we appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we just want to say that Monica and I and our team really understand that startups have a lot going on. So, there's things with funding and trying to get your service, but we really think that privacy is really important if you're collecting personal information. And if you start in the beginning, taking it seriously and prioritizing it, then in the long run, you'll have less, like there will be less cost to you, and you'll have a more trustworthy customer base who trusts in you,
Absolutely. And I appreciate the acknowledgement too of when you're starting a business, especially being a small business owner, there's so much going on. There's so many hurdles, there's so many different pieces that sometimes can be information overload. So I really do hope that for those joining us today, this was informative, and now you have yet another tool in your toolbox. And Karen and Monica, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. For those of you that are joining today, we are going to just launch a really quick poll. I promise it'll take you 30 seconds or less. It's just 3 questions. And this is to help us at Startup Canada to improve upon these things. You know, should we have asked additional questions? What can we do to just make this a really good use of your time, especially being an entrepreneur and a small business owner? Time is your most precious asset. So we certainly do not want to take too much of it. So if you could please just answer these simple questions, that would be absolutely fantastic, and we deeply appreciate it. But again, thank you to Monica and Karen for your time. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank our partners for the Startup Gov program, including our presenting partner, Amazon, as well as our program partner, EDC, our ecosystem partner, MasterCard, and of course, our community partners, including Kane, Maine, CGLCC, and the Boundless Accelerator. We will be doing more of these before the year is out. So please stay attuned to Startup Canada's socials, and we will be back in touch. So thank you so much for your time, everybody, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.